I'm joined by Einar Tangen, a current affairs commentator on China. He joins us now from Beijing. So, Einar, we heard the U.S. Director of National Intelligence say that Washington is actively trying to discourage its allies from buying Chinese technology. Is this unprecedented? And if not from China, then from whom?
Well, I don't know that it's unprecedented in the U.S. If you go back in history, this was the same things the British were saying about the Americans during the late 1800s, during the first Industrial Revolution. Basically, this is a political, economic, basically conflict between an existing power and a rising power. The U.S., instead of saying that we want to compete, as it did when Russia said they were going to send somebody to the moon, has now said that we're entitled to this and that any other power that even threatens to start, innovating is somehow anti-American. It's unfortunate, but it's a long-term trend, this idea that competition is no longer necessary as long as you're powerful.
What was the big change here? We know that there is this global race for 5G development. Is it because China is in front of this?
Well, Huawei invested tremendously in 5G. They saw the opportunity, and they've been very, very involved in setting the standards. Remember, 5G is not a thing. It's a set of standards which are used across the industry to move a lot of information very, very quickly. Now, there are hardware components, software components. Huawei has about 10% of the key intellectual property that's there. So they will have to cooperate with others, and others will have to cooperate with them in order to implement it. But Huawei really got a jump on everybody because their technology allows them to retrofit it to the existing base stations that are out there for 4G. Unfortunately, some of the standards that are being pushed by the U.S., because they involve a higher spectrum, they need 4 stations basically to cover the same area, and they cannot be retrofitted. They will have to be additional ones. So it makes it more complex and more expensive. But the real danger here for the American side is that Huawei will be first to actually get this implemented. And when that happens, the developers are not going to wait to see what the U.S. or some other country does or company. They're simply going to start innovating and developing packages, software, capabilities based on Huawei. And this is the big fear for the U.S.
Well, do you think that this U.S. investigation and the allegations against Huawei is slowing things down for Huawei? How is it affecting the industry overall?
Well, Huawei right now is, they get about 50% of their profits from their overseas business. They're the largest seller of the kind of infrastructure that goes into these kinds of 4G, 5G systems. So yes, they are being affected, but they're really surprisingly doing quite well. They took the #2 spot in the world in terms of the phone handsets. They continue to sell because they sell on a value basis. It's cheaper, it's more effective, and it's ready to go. So based on all of that things, they will still be very powerful, but you're seeing this divide in the digital world between those countries, especially developed countries that are very close to the U.S., adhering to this idea that something is wrong, that China needs to be vilified so that no one needs to compete, and those in the developing and emerging world which are adopting this technology because it offers a cheaper and more efficient way to do business and solve their issues.
And we know that the United States has been saying over and over that what they have against Huawei has nothing to do with the current U.S.-China trade dispute. But they're going into talks here in Washington this week. Is that likely to come up?
Well, I don't think anybody is fooled by Donald Trump's tactics. If you look up consistently, he was firing off rockets while he was having dessert with Xi Jinping. Every time there's a trade negotiation, he rattles the saber, either sending, especially with China, sending ships through the Taiwan Straits or within 12 miles of the Shisha Parcel Islands. This kind of behavior is very typical for Donald Trump. I mean, in his negotiations, he likes to unsettle whoever he's negotiating with by putting something out there. But I don't know that this is really the most effective way to deal with China. I think they have a pretty good handle on what he likes to do, and they have different playbooks to respond to that. But it still makes it very unpleasant, and it's starting to ratchet up the emotional divide between these countries. And at some point, Chinese consumers are going to start taking out on American companies. Something that Donald Trump doesn't realize or appear to acknowledge is that there's a tremendous number of companies in China, American companies, who are producing here, and they could potentially lose out on a lot of business.
Einar Tangen, always great to hear you from your side over there in Beijing. Thank you for joining us.